we're doing in life right now. So.
Do you want me to start?
Sure, you can start.
Okay. So my name is Anjali. I am my doctorate in clinical psychology. And so I'm in school, and until the shutdown, I was also a clinician at our in-house clinic. And that's what I'm doing now.
I'm Melissa. I am in Delray, Florida right now. I work for Emmanuel Catholic Church as a social worker and as a clinical social worker. I'm in the process of getting my clinical license. I do therapy for the parishioners there. And during my master's, I did 2 years with addiction and mental health and homelessness. So that's kind of my background. And a few disclaimers before we kind of get into the meat or the content. Jits is also here. He's also a licensed counselor and works with Catholic Charities in Delray. So yeah, a few disclaimers. We both are still working on our final licenses and our degrees. We hope that this is a place of information where we can learn more and grow more in this specific area, but this is not necessarily a place for therapy. If there are things that come up, or if there are things, concerns or deeper questions personally or otherwise, you can always reach out to us individually, and we'll be more than happy to find resources within your local area that you can get connected to. And so we also work and have are tied to a lot of organizations and schools, and so we don't necessarily represent their opinions. And so the things that we are coming to talk with have been collected through multiple resources, and we can also share those resources with you after. So, yeah. So we thought we would start with probably one of the biggest things that is kind of going around with the coronavirus and with this global pandemic that's been happening is the increase in anxiety and the increase in fears that a lot of people might be experiencing in their families, their homes, their communities, or even with themselves. And I think it's been really difficult because a lot of the things that are happening are kind of geared towards everything that they say not to do with anxiety. So don't isolate yourself, don't move away from going outside, doing these things, and that's kind of what's happening right now. And even with that, there's also so much that's changing continuously, even with guidelines or things that they're saying not to do. The like shelter in place things keep changing, how long this is going to last, all of this is, there's a lot of unknowns. So that can also leave a lot of room for more anxiety or fears to kind of take over that space. And so we were kind of looking through, and we found a few things. They're kind of like, they're categorized into 5 Ds, and so it's like an acronym. And so we thought we would kind of go through and dig a little deeper into what they mean, just things that can help you in this time to lessen the anxiety, but also to not just lean into that, but also lean into the things that are available and are there, and to try to make this time as fruitful and as beneficial as it can be. So the first one is to deploy. And so with a lot of the things that are taking place, we want to abide and follow by all the regulations and things that are coming out from the national and state laws and things like that. So, and the preventative measures. So that's just, a lot of that is to not only avoid infection for yourself, but it's also to protect and to take care of the people that we are around and the citizens that we are in community with. And so allow yourself, so there's the extreme of where this can go, but then there's also just like prudence in what we should do, right? You can and allow yourself to create a safety plan. So disinfecting things, doorknobs, handles, if you go to work, disinfecting and cleaning the things that you regularly touch once a day, washing your hands after you've been outside. I think those things are basic and allowed within the mandates and the regulations that have been put out. And part of this is also when we think about it in a little bit more of a Catholic state of mind. We are a body of Christ, and whether or not we are personally and directly affected by the coronavirus, in that we are sick or we are ill, we are also responsible and should take care of our brothers and sisters. And so if we can do something to help the grandma next door, you know, if we can protect ourselves and do what we need to do to protect them, then that is something that we should do. And so, yeah.
Yeah, so the next is, so these are our 5 Ds, 6 Ds? 5. It's deploy, distill, depathologize, distinguish, and direct. So the next one is to distill. And I think it can be very tempting, especially when things are constantly changing and when there's so much chaos and fear and everything, to just try to want to get absolutely as much information as we can get our hands on. And it's a good thing to be informed, but there's something to be said for paying attention to the quantity and the quality of the information and news that we expose ourselves to. So again, it's good to be informed. It's not good to be overwhelmed. And so the CDC, National Institute for the Study of Infectious Diseases, or Johns Hopkins, those are all really good places, resources to look if you just want to know what's happening in terms of, you know, any major updates at a local or national level, and then also what precautions you can take. And when you think about it, at the core, that's what you need to know during this time. It isn't necessarily so helpful to know always what's happening in California and what's happening in Utah. It's a lot more important to know what's happening here and what can I do to respond to that. And those resources are probably the most helpful to be able to address what's within your sphere of influence. So some practical things that might help with that is to put a time limit on how much you spend reading and looking at the news. And when you're taking in the news, focus more on the facts of what are being said rather than your emotions. As we see like story after story about people getting sick or people dying, we can feel that sense of fear come in us and start to get bigger and bigger. And then at some point, you're not even sure what's on TV, but you know very much that you are feeling very panicked inside or very scared or very overwhelmed. And so avoid the temptation to learn everything there is to know about COVID and focus on being informed and not spending more time than necessary on it. Like Mel was saying, there's a time when anxiety, fears like that can spike, but they don't have to. There is a way to go through this that is calm and that is measured and that's responsible and responsive, but that isn't fearful or just running around crazy. Back to you, Mel.
Yes. Did you want to do the
Oh, sorry. That was my bad. It's still there. Okay. The other thing is that while it is better to be calm and to think through things clearly, it's also okay if you're feeling nervous or if you're feeling anxious. This is something that's new that hasn't really happened in the history of the world in quite this way. So just because you're feeling anxious right now doesn't mean that you have some kind of disorder. It doesn't mean that, you know, you need to check yourself into psychiatric help or something like that. It's what some psychologists have called an automatic anxiety or an uncomfortable feeling, which comes from just like seeing something that's frightening and we react. But that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It means that there's something right with you, because when we see scary things, it's normal to react in a scared way. So it's kind of balancing these two things. Like, it's okay if you're feeling scared, but there's things that we can do to sort of limit the effect that that has on us.
So the next one is distinguish. And I think this is a really important, sorry, I have 5 roommates and they're They're going a little crazy. Okay, so distinguish. I think this is a really important thing to differentiate between physical distancing versus social distancing. We are asked by CDC and our government to physically distance ourselves from the people around. So keeping that 6 foot distance and to maintain a healthy distance so that we aren't infecting people or catching things that we don't need to. But social distancing is something very different. Social distancing means we are separating ourselves and isolating ourselves from our community, our families, or even just coming into a place where we're just we're alone, and that's not what we want to do in this time, especially with it being quarantine. There is a natural distance that has been placed on all of us. We are either in our homes. Actually, we are in our homes. That's really the space you have, and so in that we don't want to deepen the isolation by not connecting. I think this is really beautiful and interesting, the way that social media has kind of taken a turn, and we've all kind of leaned into social media, and this being the way that we connect and the way that we communicate, even at a deeper level now, because there's no other way to do that. And so especially during this time, if you are feeling your anxiety or a sense of loneliness or a sense of anything, fears, all of these things kind of creeping up, reach out. Use the things that we have at our means, whether it be online communities, whether it be studies, the things that are happening in the diocese around, things that you can plug into, the different things that are being offered by Crown of Thorns, Crown of Glory, the different things that are happening that you can plug into. Utilize those things because they're there for a reason. And the more that we continue to connect and understand and kind of take joy and in our community and in the things that are happening, I think not that it'll be easier, but we'll all kind of make it through this somehow together, and it'll take a little bit off of being a person on an island by yourself.
Okay, so the last point is to direct your attention to things other than COVID. So, do all the organization and cleaning that you've been like, oh, this month is too busy, I'll do it next month. Now is the time. Learn the instrument that you've been wanting to learn. Learn to cook some things. The one place you can go to, not excessively, don't make it your excuse to go all the time, but the one place you can go to is the grocery store. So, pick up some ingredients you haven't tried before, learn to cook something different, and do things that enrich your heart, your mind, your body. So go exercising. Even if you're horrible at it, but you've always liked to paint, try painting, try to create healthy habits that are helpful both for your mental and your physical well-being. So, as much as you can, exercise, pay attention to what you eat. And it can be tempting when all of our schedules are sort of shifted by not having to see people in person, to just go to bed at unreasonable times and wake up whenever, depending on what your work schedules are. But that it's actually important for your body and for your mind to maintain a routine. It doesn't have to be as strict as it is when you're going into work, but things that are very fluctuating are not very helpful for us, actually. And it might seem in general that a lot of what we said is just practical common sense. And I'm sure many of you guys are listening to it right now being like, well, why do we tune into this? My mom could have told me this, But it's funny how when a lot of things are changing in our environment, it can actually be very easy to forget these things and let go of these things without even realizing. And so even as we're kind of talking through these things, it might be good to just sort of check in with yourself and to see if, like, how you're doing on each of these things. Like, are you spending a lot of time watching to the news and just kind of getting absorbed in that? Like, what kind of activities are you getting involved in right now that are life-giving, that are actually bringing you joy and energy during this time? Because the things that are sort of life-sucking, like the isolation and all these things, are there. But what are we doing on the other side of that? And that's kind of one of the main things that we wanted to convey, is that it's very important to be mindful and to be intentional always, but maybe in a particular way during this time when our attention isn't naturally grabbed by other things around us.
Yeah. And I was also just thinking about if you were or had been experiencing anxiety before all of this kind of started, and you've kind of seen an increase and a rise in your anxiety, maybe feeling more tension, more panic in that. Maybe trying to do a little bit of a backtracking to see what all kind of changed. And I don't mean necessarily the pandemic hitting. I mean, what changed in your routine? What maybe were you doing before that you aren't necessarily doing after? Were you taking a walk maybe once a day? Were you checking in with your friend that you're not doing now? What changed? And sometimes it can be something very small, but routines actually help us a lot more than we think. And the things that we start letting go of when we start feeling that anxiety creep in are the things that are actually helping us and holding us together. So if you, in the midst of all of these changes, in the midst of getting shelter in place and trying to make sure you have all those things, did you let go of your prayer time in the morning? Did you let go of your routine when you wake up and you have a set time in the morning to kind of pray and center yourself? Did you let go of your nutrition and your eating habits? Are you just kind of snacking on whatever is left, like the popcorn, the chips, the things that you aren't that you weren't normally doing, right? So how much has this changed your normal routine, and how much of it can you get back to? And I think within prudence and within what we can do, if you lean into going back to what normal looks like for you in that space, I think you might be able to combat the anxiety that's kind of coming with this pandemic as well. And also, if you were going to your therapist or counselor and you aren't able to go in person, reach out and ask if you can do teletherapy. A lot of the counselors and professionals are offering that now, especially with the changes in the situation. So if that is an option, highly, highly recommend that. Yeah. So we had a few.
But I said not therapy, but we do have some resources, recommendations that might be helpful for you guys.
Yeah, so I think one thing when we were talking about this and kind of praying about it, one thing we were realizing is we all have a lot of time and we all have a lot of free time, and how that kind of has changed and looked like in our prayer life. And silence and stillness is not something our culture and especially our generation is used to. But how maybe in this time we can learn to meditate and we can learn to lean into being mindful of the time in front of us and being mindful to what the Lord is saying in the silence and the stillness. And so two things that we can recommend and have a lot of people in have also recommended to us are the Hallow app, which is basically an app that is Anjali showing it to you guys. It's just this little purple little app with the little halo around the circle. It is a meditation, a Catholic meditation app. So it does Lectio Divina. It does 5-minute meditations on the Word of God. And it has a lot of different options and features. You can download it, and it is free. If you want more options and more resources in it, you can always pay to add stuff to it.
One of the nice things about this app is that it was primarily designed for young professionals and by young professionals. So it is sort of, I mean, anyone can use it, but it's designed such that it can be sort of flexible based on the amount of time that you have. So you can do a 5-minute Lectio, a 10-minute Lectio, or a 15-minute Lectio, and it lets you pick for each day. So that's kind of a neat thing about the app.
Can I talk about the next one?
Yeah, so another practice that a lot of people have found useful just in general is something called Catholic mindfulness. So this is something that was developed by Dr. Greg Bottaro, who founded the Catholic Psych Institute. And what it is basically a way of going through your life, paying attention to how you are in different moments. And I think that this is very important to our our formation just as humans, but also in a particular way to our formation as Catholics. It's a way of becoming very uniquely attuned to your inner life, which is very important when it comes to how we enter into prayer, how we connect with God, but also how we connect with other people and how we connect with ourselves. And so there are resources for Catholic mindfulness online. You can just Google it. If not, there's a book, the title of which I'm currently blanking on. Mindful Catholic, thank you. There is even a program for children that they recently released. It's normally a curriculum that's done in schools, but they've recently made it available for homeschooling families. But now that the majority of the families in the country, whether they have chosen it or not, there's the Mindful Catholic book Mel is showing. There's a lot of families, regardless of whether they've chosen it or not, are now homeschooling their kids. And so they've actually released a curriculum that's meant to help kids kind of engage with this. And it's called Sitting Like a Saint. And it's to sort of bring that mindfulness into daily life and into education particularly.
And I think this is particularly useful. I was actually reading it a few weeks ago, and especially with anxiety, I think having a lot of time can sometimes bring up the anxiety even more, because there's a lot of thoughts running through your mind. There's a lot of things that are just coming, and you don't really know how to filter those thoughts, or don't know how to decrease anxiety around those specific thoughts. And so I think this book does a beautiful job bridging psychology, theology, and philosophy in this really beautiful and very, very practical and understandable way, and teaches how these thoughts don't have to control your everyday life, whether you suffer from clinical anxiety or just the daily fluctuations in your day-to-day. It really does a beautiful job at teaching you how to see thoughts as they are, and how to lean into what God is doing in the present moment, and how to become more aware of that. And like Anjali said, it's really a lifestyle, and really something that you can carry with long throughout this time. Yeah. And the Catholic Psych Institute is also, their website is amazing and has a lot of incredible resources and links and things that you can find. The Peace of Mind Foundation is
with the Catholic Psych Institute, they also offer teletherapy. They don't accept insurance, but if you are experiencing things that you feel like would benefit from therapy, that's an option.
Yeah, and I'm sure they can offer more resources as well, even if you aren't able to connect necessarily with them. The Peace of Mind Foundation is a foundation in Houston started by Liz McInville. She had suffered from OCD for pretty much all of her life, and still is in that journey, but she started this foundation for those that suffer with anxiety and OCD. And the foundation itself is a really beautiful foundation, but the site has a lot of links and a lot of very sound professionals that come in and speak to these things, and very quick, very practical pointers for how to do this in the daily life. So it's also a really great resource. And that's about it. Any questions, comments, concerns, anything that you'd like to see in the coming weeks? Any topics, anything? We're also going to be having Dr. Anthony is going to be coming on tomorrow and doing a rundown of news that's kind of compiled of what's actually going on and what's happening. And he's also going to be debunking a lot of the things that have been traveling around on WhatsApp and those forwarded messages that have been going around. So if you want to tune into that, that'll be tomorrow. Yeah. All right.
Thank you, guys.